Hi, my name's Elena Harriman. Today I'm going to be presenting on a research topic I did called overwriting stereotypes. And my main research question here was about whether writing a narrative from another person's perspective can help reduce stereotyping and bias toward that individual or his or her group. And so a few important key terms for my research project, just to give some background. First is the correspondence bias, and the correspondence bias is the tendency of people to attribute people's behavior to their internal personality characteristics rather than their situational constraints. So, for example, the stereotype that blonde girls are dumb are perpetuated by dispositional attributions, that blonde girls act dumb because they are dumb rather than, for example, blonde girls act dumb because media influences pressure them to act dumb. So time and time again, perpetuated in society, these dispositional attributions lead to stereotypes and automatic categorizing of how people supposedly act. And there's a few different means of overcoming the correspondence bias. Most important is people's social cognitive ability, which is the ability of people to anticipate others' perspectives. And this is not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. It's usually something that requires deliberate effort. And it's been found that because writing is such a deliberate, protracted operation, it leads to making better inferences about others' behavior. So just some background on previous studies of people's social cognitive ability and writing ability. They did a study on 4th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, and they had them write persuasive essays. And they found that one of the most important predictors of the quality of these persuasive essays was the student's social cognition, which is an aggregate term of their social cognitive ability. And this is a surprising finding, that this social inference is so important for writing, since we normally think of writing as a very isolated act with oneself rather than communicating with other people. But this research done by Rubin and Rayfoth underlies this idea that writing is really always a communicative act, even if even if the author's not sure who he or she is communicating with. They're always communicating to someone. So especially with a persuasive essay, the most important factor in the quality of it is the ability to anticipate the audience's perspective and their reaction to the message. And so this research is really interesting. It showed that even mechanical errors, such as indeterminate pronouns, are caused by an inability of the author to imagine other people's perspective and the information they need. And so there's a few different ways that people can get into another person's perspective in order to understand it better. The first one is experience taking, and this is probably something that probably all of you have experienced when you read a book. Experience taking is defined as letting go of your own self-concept and your own views and identity become less accessible as you begin to merge with the narrator of a story or a protagonist in a story. And so researcher Lisa Libby did a study about this, and she found that when participants read narratives of people, first-person narratives by people, they were more likely to simulate those characters' behavior, and they were more likely to report personality characteristics that were in line with those individuals. And also, a really interesting finding is she found that experience taking, this merging of the self with the narrator, led to less stereotyping toward a narrator who is in a stigmatized group. But a really important finding was that if participants were informed before they started reading the narrative what stigmatized group their narrator belonged to, they were unable to get into this experience-taking mode. So when they were informed that the narrator of their story was African American, they were unable to get in the experience-taking mode of simulating their behavior, and they reported no less prejudice. but when they weren't informed until after the narrative was finished that it was an African American narrator, they had already been in this experience taking state, and then they reported less prejudice toward African Americans following the narrative if they hadn't been informed of his or her identity before. And so that's experience taking. Perspective taking is a little bit of a different theory on how we understand other perspectives, and it states that we use our own self-concepts and views, and then we adjust away from those. So we're actually using our own views to understand other perspectives. We're not really letting go of our own identity. So for my study, I studied whether writing a narrative, a first-person narrative from the perspective of an out-group member would allow students to lead to less stereotyping and more situational as opposed to dispositional attributions toward that person. And so my stigmatized group was bullies. And I thought that by writing this first-person scenario from the perspective of a bully, students would be less it would combine aspects of experience and perspective taking so that they could lead to less out-group stereotyping, less dispositional attributions for bullies' behavior. Even at the same time, they knew the bully's identity. So it would not require late disclosure as it did in the experiment-taking study. And so this is what I found. I found that when students wrote from the perspective of a bully, they rated, following this narrative, they rated bullies' behavior as significantly more situational than dispositional, and they ranked the bullies as significantly more likely to feel remorse and change their behavior after they wrote from the perspective of a bully versus when they were just writing an objective analysis from a third-person perspective. So this shows that writing does indeed allow us